written and backed Stephen Adams, and we thought it might be all over today, but the Oklahoma City Thunder have been beaten by the Golden State Warriors.
That's right. Game 5 went back to Golden. They went, so it was 3-1, and then they went back to, because they swapped home court advantage. But the next game, Game 6, is back in Oklahoma, and so the Thunder have an opportunity to close it out. I just love Stephen Adams. I think he represents New Zealand so well. I love that he is just himself. I love how unaffected by the NBA and stardom he is. And I couldn't think of a better role model for aspiring young basketballers in this country who want to create a pathway to a nicer future.
What he's done is huge, really, isn't
Absolutely,
it?
yeah.
And in so short a time.
When you look at his background, one of 18 kids, is it? You know, a pretty rough upbringing in Rotorua, Fart Town as he calls it. I think he's the man, and I hope they do it in Game 6. That'd be awesome.
Speaking of people we like very much, what do you think, or this is a listener called Dan saying, what do panellists think about Fonterra advertising extensively using Richie McCaw to tell us how good Fonterra farmers are, when there are contractors not getting paid for 90 days, etc., and farmers in Australia being stung by Fonterra with clawback payments? The millions for this campaign, says Dan, could be better spent cleaning up their own home paddock. Is this campaign misguided?
I looked at it, and sorry, Jim, didn't mean to.
No, I'm just going to clarify. He's not advertising Fonterra. He is an ambassador. For. He's not advertising milk and cheese. What do you reckon about it?
I looked at it. Beloved and I looked at this the other night and looked at each other and went, "What on earth was that piece of drivel?" I mean, it's like, seriously. It sends shivers up my spine for all the wrong reasons.
Yeah, I think gone are the days when advertisers could just put a famous figure, a loved face next to a message and expect people to blindly believe that. I hate seeing my sporting heroes selling heat pumps and moving companies and this. I wish, Richie's already done so much for this country. He should just be able to do his own thing and just fly gliders and fly helicopters.
But if he was going to do it, you'd think they'd have put a little bit of creative thought into it rather than having him come across like he's doing an infomercial.
Well, they're going for that kind of real approach that ad makers try and do, where they it's kind of lo-fi just to kind of connect with the normal folks. I mean, there are people who love Richie who go, oh, wow, maybe Fonterra's not so bad after all.
But did they think Fonterra was bad anyway? Is Richie appealing to anyone who actually cared about Fonterra?
His mission is to build, the job description is to build pride among Kiwis for Fonterra.
Oh, please.
Our national brand.
Fonterra, give money to environmental programs.
All right,
give money to cleaning up waterways. Tell us about that.
They've put the clock in a different position on the wall today. And I'm having... No.
Oh, sorry.
Radio New Zealand.
Beg your pardon.
RNZ. And I'm having trouble telling when the hour is over, but if I lean forward, I can do it. There is time to ask you about one more thing. Big bash at TV3 tonight.
Oh, who cares?
Oh, this is interesting then. All right.
Why do media always try and make other media people the story? I don't know. I thought we're supposed to report the news. We're supposed to report what happens. We're not supposed to be the news. I mean, it's not unusual for people to leave workplaces and, leave careers, and for people who've been on TV for years to not be on. It's like, come on. Anyway, she'll be back on TV soon.
I didn't get invited either. I'm just miffed.
She is, what's the expression, the mate of the nation rather than the mother or the auntie of the nation.
Auntie of the nation,
yeah. But she is much loved, Sue Wells.
Yeah, she's a cracker.
But do you share Oscar's slightly jaded view about television presenters leaving and the excitement around that?
I've been a politician. I've been a television presenter. I just, I think television presenters and politicians are the loveliest people on the planet. There we are. End of story. You can't get enough of them.
You're a giving person.
I was hoping we'd get to talk about the racist stream in Canterbury.
Oh, the what?
Yes,
the racist stream in Canterbury.
The racist stream in Canterbury.
The racist stream of consciousness?
No, there's a stream called N-word stream.
Yes, which they're now not going to call Steelhead. I'm sorry, this is a very abbreviated discussion.
It should be called Streamy McStreamface. That's my suggestion for a new suggestion.
Name. Oscar Kitely. Sue Wells. Thank you, Oscar. Thank you, Sue. Have a lovely weekend, everybody.
Kia ora, everyone. Welcome to Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm John Campbell, cutting it a bit fine tonight, and on behalf of the Checkpoint team, thank you for joining us tonight. 27 years in jail for the man who opened fire inside the Ashburton Winds office. Show me the land. John Key puts the onus on the Auckland Council, saying land supply is the issue and the housing crisis won't be solved until the council creates more of it. So what is the government's role here? I ask him. For the first time ever, the Salvation Army dips into its reserves as it responds to the housing crisis. Why do Sikhs wear turbans? And how non-Sikhs can try one on. The Thunderloos, but that doesn't matter. We talk about Steve Adams anyway. And Donald Trump, if you're still laughing at him, well, it's probably time you stopped. All of that and more in the next 89 minutes. But first, as always, Katrina Batten with RNZ News.
Kia ora, good evening. A woman who survived the Ashburton Work and Income Office shooting says she will never forget what she witnessed that day. Today in the High Court in Christchurch, Russell Tully was sentenced to a minimum non-parole period of 27 years in prison. He was found guilty of the murders of Peggy Noble and Lee Cleveland and one count of attempted murder after a 2-week trial in March. Leanne Hydes, who was with them in the office, was emotional as she read out her witness impact statement.
The memories of the 1st of September are never far from my mind, and I can recall it as if it was yesterday. That night and the immediate days following, I couldn't go to bed as I was too scared to close my eyes, and doing so meant all I could see were Peg and Lee and the terrible sight that surrounded them.
Leanne Hyde says Tully is evil and should never be let back into society. The aunt of Christchurch woman Renee Duckmanton says her niece's death has broken her family. The 22-year-old's body was found on the main Rakaya Road on May the 15th. Sue McGrath was in the Christchurch District Court this morning for the first appearance of the man charged with her murder. Ms McGrath and a man yelled abuse and lunged at him from the public gallery. Speaking afterwards, Ms McGrath says there was relief in the family at hearing the news last night that an arrest had been made. The day after the budget debate has moved to whether or not the government will announce tax cuts in 2017 election year. The Finance Minister, Bill English, says the government's debt reduction target could ease, allowing tax cuts to be considered. Here's our political reporter, May Heron.
The Labour Party says it still believes sizable cuts, either now or in future years, are not affordable. Its leader, Andrew Little, says the budget projections show real wages will actually fall in 2017 and 2018, and the government would be better to focus on pushing up people's incomes. The Green Party co-leader, James Shaw, says now's not the time to be cutting revenues, as there are some real challenges facing the country, such as homelessness and climate change. He says it's a clear bribe to bring in tax cuts in an election year, and even more cynical to promise it the following year. From Parliament, May Heron.
Met Service is warning of torrential rain and tropical cyclone-strength winds for most of the country tonight and into the weekend as a severe storm strengthens across the Tasman Sea. It says the storm will bring heavy rain, thunderstorms and damaging wind gusts. In the North Island, rain will be heaviest in Taranaki, Manawatu, Whanganui and Wellington, with more than 100 millimetres overnight in places, possibly causing flooding and slips. Met Service says wind gusts may be higher than 130 kilometres per hour in some areas, with the worst of the wind in the Marlborough and Wellington regions. Health officials in the United States say a superbug resistant to all known antibiotics has been found in the country for the first time. A middle-aged woman is infected with a strain of the E. coli virus that's resistant to an antibiotic of last resort. America's most senior public health officials say the end of the road for antibiotics is not far away. The BBC's Laura Bicker reports the deadly strain has already been found in China and Europe.
The female patient tested positive for a strain of E. coli that's resistant to the antibiotic known as colistin. The US Centre for Disease Control and Prevention says it was an old drug, but the only one left to treat what they describe as a nightmare bacteria. Researchers are worried that the antibiotic-resistant gene found in the bacteria, known as MCR1, could easily spread. That could create a superbug capable of evading all types of antibiotics. Officials say unless there's more research, some infections could eventually become untreatable.
Laura Bicker in Washington. Wellington City councillors have been told to sort through the rubbish if they want to retrieve personal documents thrown out by a staff member who thought they were no longer needed. They were stored on shelves and desks in a locked room shared by all councillors in the Civic Building. Councillor Helen Ritchie says she's angry staff went through her papers, threw them out and now have offered her the opportunity to go dumpster diving to retrieve them. The Mayor, Celia Wade-Brown, says it was a mistake and both the person who threw out the documents and the Chief Executive have apologised. In sport, the defending NBA basketball champions, the Golden State Warriors, have won Game 5 of the Western Conference playoffs, beating the Oklahoma City Thunder 120-111 in Oakland. The results mean New Zealand's Steven Adams and his Oklahoma side now lead the best-of-7 series 3-2. Game 6 in the series is on Sunday. New Zealand's first day-night cricket test on home soil has been pencilled in for early 2018 against England, but it'll need resource consent. The match is part of the international schedule for New Zealand in the 2017-18 season, released today, and features series against Pakistan, Australia, South Africa and the West Indies. The day-night test will be played at Eden Park, although New Zealand Cricket Chief Executive David White says it still needs the Auckland Council's approval.
Not only can't you play on a Sunday night, but also the number of night games are capped at the moment. So I know that Eden Park are working through that with ATED and with a new unitary plan coming up soon, they'll be addressing that issue.
New Zealand Cricket Chief Executive David White. The Highlanders coach Jamie Joseph is playing down the impact the result of tonight's Super Rugby match between last year's two finalists may have on the makeup of this year's playoffs. 2015 beaten finalists, the Hurricanes, host the reigning champions, the Highlanders, in Wellington tonight. Both teams are currently in top 8 playoff spots, but Joseph says with 3 games to play after tonight's match, the quarter-final positions are still very much undecided. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, Tashi and Nungshi Malik, the first twin sisters to climb the world's highest peak. Something to do when you're not studying exercise and sports science in Invercargill. The singer Caroline Tamati, aka Lady Six, takes us on a tour of her Christchurch stomping grounds. Dina Newman remembers the day saying Kia ora, got her the sack. And we have a sonic tonic dedicated to the man, whether you're working for him or not. On Nights, after the news at 7. On RNZ National.
Met service weather through to midnight tomorrow, Northland to Waikato, Coromandel and the Bay of Plenty. A few showers turning to rain for a time tomorrow morning with heavy and possibly thundery falls. Gisborne, Hawke's Bay and Wairarapa, high cloud increasing, rain tomorrow morning, then clearing. However, showers for Wairarapa tomorrow evening. Waitomo to Wellington, including Taumaranui, Taupo, Taihape, also Nelson and Marlborough. Scattered showers, rain with heavy and possibly thundery falls, spreading east overnight. Rain easing to showers tomorrow morning, some thundery in the west from tomorrow afternoon. Bulla and Westland, rain developing this evening with some heavy and possibly thundery falls north of the glaciers, rain easing tomorrow afternoon. For Fiordland, mostly fine. Canterbury, North Otago, Dunedin, rain with heavy falls spreading south overnight and snow lowering to 600 metres, easing tomorrow evening. For the remainder of Otago and Southland, isolated showers turning to rain tomorrow morning with snow down to 600 metres. And the Chatham Islands, fine apart from rain tomorrow morning. It's coming up to 9 minutes past 5.
Thank you very much indeed, Katrina. I will never forget the day the man I tried to help tried to end my life. Those were the words of a survivor of the Ashburton work and income shooting before Russell John Tully was today sentenced to serve at least 27 years in jail. He was found guilty of the murders of Peggy Noble and Lee Cleveland and 1 count of attempted murder after a 2-week trial in March. Sally Murphy was in the High Court in Christchurch.
Leanne Hydes was in the Ashburton Work and Income office when Russell Tully walked in wielding a gun.
The memories of the 1st of September are never far from my mind, and I can recall it as if it was yesterday. That night and the immediate days following, I couldn't go to bed as I was too scared to close my eyes. And doing so meant all I could see were Peg and Lee and the terrible sight that surrounded them.
Miss Hydes stared at Tully, who was only a few metres away, as she read out her impact statement. He showed no emotion. She told the court the stress of that day in 2014 caused her hair to fall out, and she developed post-traumatic stress disorder.
Mr. Tully's overrated sense of self-importance had him believe we were responsible for his situation. He didn't go to any other organisation he had a grievance with where there were men. He took a gun and he walked into an office full of women. Mr. Tully is an extremely clever man. He not only manipulated us, but the justice system and its process, the court process, is all for his antics and game playing for the good of his own means.
The packed gallery sat in silence as the witness impact statements were read. Kim Adams was shot at as she tried to escape the Wyn's office. She told the court she is thankful to be alive.
I still struggle with the fact that if I hadn't moved, or moved too slow, or Mr. Tully had chosen pallets, I wouldn't be here today, and my children would be motherless. My eldest would have been orphaned, and he wouldn't then need to take on the responsibility of bringing up his brother.
Miss Adams says the shooting has left her mentally exhausted. Sleepless and unable to work full-time, she says even the simple tasks like going to the supermarket leave her feeling overwhelmed.
I can talk and talk about this over and over again, and my anxiety levels may get better, and I may not dream as much, but I will never forget the day that the person I tried to help tried to end my life.
The court also heard from Crystal Bishopson, whose grandmother, Peggy Noble, was killed in the Wyn's office that day.
To this day, our family is grieving, as we still find it hard to come to terms with the merciless and horrific circumstances in which Peg's life was taken. Everyone should have the right to go to work and return home safely. We are all devastated that we never had the chance to say goodbye, but more so by the fact that we will never see our Peggy again.
Tully made a submission in court that he was not in the right mind frame at the time and that his mental health should be taken into account. When the judge dismissed his comments, Tully yelled over him. Justice Manders sentenced Tully to a minimum non-parole period of 27 years in prison.
Your strong sense of entitlement leads to deeply entrenched views of grievance, which, as this offending patently demonstrates, is capable of generating murderous thoughts and actions. You should be considered as presenting a high risk of harm to others and as a person who appears to have no regard for the sanctity of human life.
Tully quietly walked out of the dock as the victims' families hugged in the gallery. He will not be eligible for parole until he is 77. The Ministry of Social Development's Chief Executive, Brendan Boyle, says he hopes the sentence will provide some closure for the victims' families. In the High Court in Christchurch, Sally Murphy.
12 minutes past 5. We're going to look at the budget and at housing shortly, but we are going to stay in Christchurch and we're going to stay in court. A police officer was left with a bloody hand in the Christchurch District Court this morning when the family of Renee Duckmanton yelled abuse and lunged at the man accused of her murder. The 31-year-old had only been in the court a few moments when the yelling began, and police and court staff had to hold a man and a woman back as they attempted to reach the accused. The badly burned body of Ms Duckmanton, who was 22, was found on Main Rakaia Road on May the 15th after she was last seen around Manchester Street in Christchurch the night before. Belinda McCammon was in court for the hearing.
The man accused of Renee Duckmanton's murder showed no emotion as he was brought into the court, but moments later he turned towards the public gallery as the woman's father and aunt began yelling and moving towards him. Several police officers and court security had to forcibly restrain the pair, and court staff immediately called for the court to be cleared. Once order was restored, the hearing resumed, with the public excluded from the court. The accused was granted name suppression and remanded in custody until his next appearance. Outside the court, Renee Duckmanton's aunt, Sue McGrath, talked to the media about the outburst and explained that the last 12 days had been hell for her family.
Everyone's just broken. Everyone's just broken.
When did the family find out about the arrest?
Last night.
And what was their reaction then?
Just relief, because he can't do this to another lady, working lady or anyone.
Sue McGrath was soon joined outside the court by Miss Duckmanton's 9-year-old sister Madison, who was keen to share her feelings with the media.
We've been sad for a couple of years.
This is Renee's
when this
sister.
happened. It's just been really sad for me and my family, so hopefully we can get through and get this out of our head so we can...
Sue McGrath said there was some comfort and relief for the family when they were told last night an arrest was made. But she says the family are concerned about the safety of other sex workers in the city.
I just hope the working ladies out there now, protect themselves a bit more, and they need to get more cameras down Manchester Street, and my heart does go out to the ladies.
The murder accused will appear at the High Court in Christchurch on June the 10th. In Christchurch for Checkpoint, Belinda McCammon.
5:15 on Checkpoint. Politics and housing now, and the two are very much linked at the moment. The Prime Minister's ramped up the rhetoric over the Auckland Council's role in the city's housing shortage, saying a new national policy statement will ultimately dictate how much housing land there will be. John Campbell says the soon-to-be-revealed government policy will include measures tracking land prices, and if they keep rising, the council will have to act. But Auckland's Deputy Mayor Penny Hulse calls the measure simplistic and says land supply is not the big issue. Our Auckland correspondent, Todd Nile, reports.
The government believes a lack of land for housing and past council planning policies have played a big role in Auckland's housing shortage and rising prices. It's already warned the council that when it votes in August on a new development blueprint called the Unitary Plan, it must include enough capacity for future housing. The Prime Minister, John Campbell, today talked up the government's new tool in the land supply debate, an impending national policy statement that will track land prices.
Ultimately what that means is if land prices are rising too rapidly, then ultimately that will see the obvious market reaction, which is more land will be released.
That would trump any plans the Auckland Council had. The Deputy Mayor, Penny Hulse, says while they await more detail, the notion that releasing more land will fix Auckland's housing woes is too simplistic.
Land release, if that was the answer to the cost of houses in Auckland, house prices would have gone down as we've released all of this land under the special housing areas. It shows that that's not the only driver, and the other drivers need to be addressed at the same time.
If push came to shove before a court, John Campbell says councils would not be allowed to resist.
While it's possible always for a council to say, I won't follow someone's request, the advice that they'll be getting on their side is that if you don't release that land, you'll lose in court, and if the developer goes to court, in all probability, depending on the conditions and the case, they'll win.
Penny Hulse says land supply just isn't the issue that's holding back the rate of new home building.
We've got 6.5 years of land planned for, infrastructure in the ground and ready to go. Government themselves have got more than 20 special housing areas that belong to Housing New Zealand that are ready to go. There's no shortage of places to build. Our question to government would be, perhaps you need to just get on with it.
The Auckland Council's already warned if the current rate of population growth continues, it will struggle to afford to build the necessary infrastructure within a year or two.
The key issue is going to be that if the government does proceed with a national policy statement that may well require for land to be released at a rate that is not affordable for ratepayers to fund, then the government will have to look at alternative funding methods and to work in partnership with council to develop those.
The next crucial milestone comes in August, when the council must accept or reject the Unitary Plan, drawn up by an independent government-appointed panel following 20 months of hearings. The government is also reforming the Resource Management Act, which sits above that plan. John Campbell has made clear where the ultimate power will lie.
The national policy statement will drive the supply of land. The RMA bill has factors that tie into that, and if the Unitary Plan doesn't meet the demands of Auckland, the national policy statement, because of the way it works, will drive it, mark my words.
So a threat or a promise? The government's now clearly wanting to be seen to act on Auckland housing to stem voter disquiet over the issue. In Auckland for Checkpoint, Todd Nile.
The Prime Minister said, mark my words, so we will hear more of those words on Checkpoint after 6 o'clock tonight. The Salvation Army has dipped into its reserves to help people struggling to pay their bonds for rental housing. For the first time, it says the people were all beneficiaries and all referred by work and income officers in Auckland. Mohammed Hassan reports.
The Salvation Army's policy analyst, Alan Johnson, says around 4 people have come into their Manukau office in the last 2 days to ask for help with bond payments.
Effectively,
they've just turned up and said working income told us to come down here. These are people who are living on a welfare benefit, who would normally receive that sort of assistance from working income. So whether or not these people have run out of their options and they're simply being asked to go down to the Salvation Army for help, or whether or not there's a change of policy, we don't know.
He says while the Salvation Army have a reserve they set up with the government to help people fix their cars or buy appliances, that money has never been used for housing.
The resources are there to cope with that, but we're not altogether certain that was the intention of that fund. It was more to stop people falling into the hands of the loan sharks. And so clearly they're coming to us instead of the loan sharks, but the reality is that previously they were assisted by WINS.
In a statement released to RNZ News, Work and Income's Regional Commissioner, Blair McKenzie, says those referrals aren't happening. He says some clients are referred to the Salvation Army for budgeting advice or for community finance when they don't qualify for welfare assistance, but not for bond payments. He says some clients may have then raised the issue of rent or bond assistance on their own. On Wednesday, the Prime Minister John Campbell and the Minister for Social Development, Anne Tolley, defended people borrowing large sums of money from Work and Income to pay for emergency housing, saying it was better than turning to loan sharks. But social housing advocates, including the Salvation Army, say no one is doing that. The Mangere Budgeting Services Chief Executive, Daryl Evans, says anything that prevents people from going to loan sharks is a good thing, but it doesn't happen.
People borrow money and get into debt because they're trying to fix cars and washing machines, for example. But quite frankly, I've just not heard of any of our clients. My staff haven't reported to me that people are borrowing money to pay for motel rooms or emergency accommodation. That's a new one for me.
He says emergency housing debt should be written off because in some cases people will be repaying it until they die. Auckland Action Against Poverty's Alistair Russell says the government is using cheap tactics to paint Work and Income in a positive light. He says no one is turning to loan sharks for housing money, but they are for other things.
We are aware of people who have taken loans from loan sharks because Work and Income have declined them food grants. What they could have got $150 out of Work and Income for a food grant, they've subsequently paid a loan shark $240 for $150 worth of food. We're aware of that. And to then turn around and say that they're doing them a favour to avoid going to loan sharks essentially defies belief.
He says amid skyrocketing rental prices, a housing shortage and rising speculation, the government needs to own up to the reality that housing is in crisis. For Checkpoint, Mohammed Hassan.
Coming up on Checkpoint, the budget and tax and the budget and housing. Plus, what is the education spend going on and will it work? Also, why Wellington City councillors have been told to go dumpster diving if they want to retrieve personal documents, and the widow of a truck driver who survived a horrendous crash earlier this year but later died has described her husband as a true gentleman. We'd love your feedback in any way you choose on any subject you choose. You can text 2101 or email checkpoint@radionz.co.nz, and don't forget our Facebook and Twitter page. 23 minutes past 5. It's Friday night. Let's change the subject entirely. The defending NBA basketball champs, the Golden State Warriors, have won Game 5 of the Western Conference playoffs, beating the Oklahoma City Thunder 120-111 in Oakland. Why do we care? Well, it's great basketball, and also the result means New Zealand's Steven Adams and his Oklahoma side now lead the best of 7 series 3-2. Seriously exciting. After the game, I spoke to Fox News anchor Sam Gannon and said we were feeling a little bit bereft that Steve Adams would have to wait until Sunday New Zealand time to see if he will make it to his first NBA final.
Definitely. I mean, I'm not surprised. I mean, the thing about it is, like, Oklahoma City was right in this game until the very end. And from the Warriors' perspective, I think you have to look at it as it was do or die for them. You know, elimination, the defending champs. If they don't win tonight, it's over. You know what I mean? So I think it would have been hard to beat this team 3 times in a row. And I think that most people thought that the Golden State would probably get this one. And, you know, now you go back to Oklahoma City with that crowd rocking on Saturday night. And the thing about it is, I think the Thunder should feel pretty good going back there for Saturday because it wasn't like they got blown out in this game. You know what I mean? The Warriors played much better than they did the last two games when they got absolutely blown out. So you kind of expect that from them, you know.
Yeah.
A team that's been in this situation before. You know, last year they were down. You know, they trailed in those series 2-1. So they have so much experience to back it up. So it didn't surprise me that they won tonight.
Right. So they're 3-2 down now. The Thunder are playing at home this weekend, and if they win, that's it. They're through to the finals.
Absolutely. And I mean, there's just so much excitement around the city right now, especially because when you look at the regular season as a whole, and, you know, all the attention was on Golden State and San Antonio, and rightfully so, because those were the two best regular season teams, the Warriors, you know, the record-setting team. But just the journey that the Thunder has had in this postseason is so impressive because they were so inconsistent all season long, you know, especially defensively, and not being able to close out games down the stretch. And all of a sudden you see them turn it on. And, you know, they're playing with a chip on their shoulder, especially when you look at the fact that, you know, they haven't been healthy in the playoffs the last 3 years. So, I mean, I think they're going to be revved up. This crowd is going to be insane. It's going to be a huge game. And, you know, I think they're ready for the challenge. It's their time. They're healthy. If they just stick to their game and do what they did, you know, not necessarily tonight, but the last two games, you know, they're going to put themselves in a good position to win.
Sam, forgive me for asking this very New Zealand question, but we all love Steve Adams. Is he a big deal there, or is he just, you know, one of the team?
No, he is absolutely a big deal. And fans love him, number one. The media does too, because he's so honest. You know, a lot of the times, just like they use that term coaches speak, you know, sometimes the players can kind of get into that same routine. But what's so awesome about Adams is that he's so carefree in what he says. He just says whatever comes to mind, and he's so lighthearted. But then you almost have this split personality. Like, he's so friendly off the court, and when he's on the court, I mean, this guy's one of the toughest guys in the league, especially with that, you know, whole controversy with Draymond Green and the kick to the groin in 2 straight games. And, you know, he kind of just nonchalantly passed it off like, oh, it's whatever. I mean, fans love him because of his intensity. You know, it's like he has this never say die attitude. He can't be denied. And no, fans have definitely fallen in love with him here in Oklahoma City. And he's a riot. I mean, he's the perfect TV soundbite because he'll give you a great answer every time.
Right. Okay. So how exciting will it be in Oklahoma City if the Thunder win on Saturday night?
Oh, my gosh. I mean, it would just be everything. You know, they haven't been here since 2012, you know, and when you look at last year, the fact that Durant, you know, only played in 27 games, missed 55 games in the season, they were plagued with injuries. And then when you look at the 2 seasons before that, in 2013, they were poised to make an incredible run, and then Westbrook gets injured in the Houston series. Then the next year, Serge Ibaka gets injured in the Western Conference Finals, and that's why they didn't beat the Spurs then. So this team is finally healthy, and they're playing with an intensity and a physicality that we didn't necessarily see in consistent stretches over the regular season. So this city will absolutely lose its mind if they can do it. And I think they do. I think they'll be able to close it out here on Saturday. You know, the Warriors had to win this game, especially because they were blown out. So, I mean, I think it's going to be an awesome game on Saturday night.
Sam Gunn, Fox Sports anchor, who is obviously a big Thunder fan. I didn't really know half of the people she was talking about, but kind of Sam takes you with her, doesn't she? Wellington City councillors have been told to go dumpster diving if they want to retrieve personal documents thrown out by staff. The 14 councillors have just one room in the Civic Building, a shared space where they can work. But earlier in the week, a staff member who thought the room was a mess looked through the documents scattered on shelves and desks, found several old agendas and committee papers, and threw the lot into a locked wheelie bin to be destroyed. Our Wellington local government reporter Michael Kropp has the story.
I came into our shared office space, the only space that councillors have, which is a very small space, to do some work, and found all my papers gone.
Just last week, councillors were told they had been barred from dealing directly with staff and locked out of most parts of the Civic Building. The new rules followed allegations of councillors bullying staff and rifling through papers on staff desks. This week, their documents were thrown out. Helen Ritchie says she's very angry.
They're all jumbled up in a rubbish bin somewhere, and I am faced, and we are faced, with the prospect of going through the rubbish bin to retrieve our very valuable political notes. It's a major and very serious breach.
Ms Ritchie says the issue represents the dysfunction at the council, which is starting to affect the city's governance. Nicola Young says she's obsessed with tidiness and would never keep anything important in the room.
The council-only area is a truly grotty room, and it was full of old papers, and it desperately needed to clean up. So I'm delighted it has been cleaned up, but I'd have to say it was a little insensitive, considering that no one was told about it in advance, and apparently some people keep personal papers there.
Ms Young says the council's become an unhappy place and lacks leadership.
Truth is, we've had a kind of sustained deterioration in relationships at the council, and I completely blame the mayor for her lack of leadership. So this follows on from us being kept out of certain areas of council and accusations of bullying.
The Mayor, Celia Wade-Brown, says the papers should never have been removed, but she's sure it was an honest mistake.
There should have been a decent amount of notice for councillors to tidy up their shared area before any papers were disposed of, and that was a mistake, and there's been an apology made. Councillors' papers should not be removed without their knowledge.
She says both the staff member who threw the documents out and the chief executive have apologised. But will Helen Ritchie get her papers back?
The mind boggles, actually. I'm not quite sure whether one would tip out the whole bin and then try and rearrange the papers, or go and head first, or whatever.
Helen Ritchie says she's reluctant to go through the bins because she doesn't want to go through other councillors' papers. For Checkpoint, Michael Kropp.
Coming up on Checkpoint, the Education Minister Hekia Parata reveals more details of the government's surprise plan to target the children of long-term beneficiaries. Donald Trump now has the numbers. None of this is theory anymore. He has the numbers to be the Republican candidate in November's US presidential elections. Boy, oh boy. And the man who loved world records so much he changed his name to Guinness and even removed all his teeth just to break another world record. Goodness gracious me. But first, before all of that, Katrina Batten with the headlines.
He's got a lot of records, just so you know.
Has he?
A huge amount of records. 500 or something. A woman who survived the Ashburton Work and Income Office shooting says the murderer, Russell Tully, is evil and should never be let back into society. Tully was today sentenced to a minimum 27 years in jail. He was earlier found guilty of the murders of Peggy Noble and Lee Cleveland and one count of attempted murder. Leanne Hides, who was with them in the office, said her victim impact statement she would never forget what she witnessed that day. The aunt of Christchurch woman Renee Duckmanton says her niece's death has broken her family. The 22-year-old's body was found on Main Rakaya Road on May the 15th. Sue McGrath and Miss Duckmanton's father yelled abuse and lunged at the man charged with her murder when he appeared in court today. The day after the budget, debate has moved on to whether or not the government will announce tax cuts in 2017 election year. The Finance Minister, Bill English, says the government's debt reduction target could ease, allowing tax cuts to be considered. For the first time, the Salvation Army has dipped into its reserves to help people struggling to pay their bonds for rental housing. The Manukau branch says it's been asked to give loans to 4 people in the last 2 days who are trying to get into new accommodation. The Education Minister, Hekia Parata, says nearly all schools will receive some money from the government's new scheme targeting the children of beneficiaries. The budget included $12 million a year to go to schools enrolling the 150,000 children whose families have been on a benefit for a long time. It's instead of the usual annual increase to the school's operations grants. Wellington's Mayor Celia Wade-Brown says councillors' documents should not have been thrown out without permission, but it was an honest mistake. Those are the headlines. I'll be back at 6 with more news, sport and weather.
Thank you very much indeed, Katrina. Yes, we're going to talk about the budget and that surplus projected to be just $6.75 billion by 2020. So what does the government spend it on? Debt payment, Nona Peltier, or tax reductions, or something else? That's coming up. But Nona, one of the country's biggest remaining manufacturers, Fisher & Paykel Healthcare, has posted a record profit. Business reporter Nona Peltier has been looking at the result. Nona, how did F&P Management? I'm confused. F&P Healthcare?
Yeah, it's a public listed company, and they manufacture
equipment that they use for respiratory, sleep apnea.
Because there's the other F&P, who are the manufacturers of whiteware, who are laying off all their staff in Auckland and moving up to Thailand, right? Completely different company.
Completely different company.
Excellent, thank you. No,
and the one that we're talking about actually manufactures healthcare products, and they make their money. Well, a lot of their money. I think 83% of their revenue, as a matter of fact, I wrote it down right here, from the consumables. So they make a piece of equipment that helps you sleep better if you've got sleep apnea, and then you have a mask. But you can't use that mask forever, so you have to buy another mask. And or you use surgical equipment and you have a mask. And now another patient comes through the room, another mask. So every time you use a mask, these guys are selling another product. And that's how they're making a lot of money.
How much money?
Oh, quite a lot, yes. Their profit climbed 27% to $143.4 million in the 12 months to the end of March. And their revenue hit $815.5 million. And they're expecting this growth to continue. Yes.
Wow.
So they're looking at this financial year, ending in March. So we're into the new financial year. Similar sale growth, $900 million is what they're looking at, and a net profit of between $165 and $170 million. That's quite a lot. Yeah. Now, they're very clever because they do a lot of research and development here in New Zealand, and they develop and manufacture high-end products here. They do mass manufacturing in their Mexican plant. They've got a new chief executive. His name is Louis Graydon, and he's the same. He's been in the business as long as the former one who was his mentor. So, this is a business that has a very clear focus on the future, steady as she goes, making good profit growth, growing their market share all the way, plus giving their shareholders a dividend, which shareholders love. So, of course, the share price keeps moving up, up, up. Not very much, just 1%, because that's what the market was expecting. A good result, and they got one. And so, anyway, the market ended up to a record high. Just 7 points.
Another record high.
Another record high.
I
tell you what, we have them all the time.
Yeah, it's like that guy from the Guinness Book of Records.
I'll tell you what, we're very close.
Sad guy we've got coming up in the program later on.
Meanwhile,
to change his name to Guinness.
Meanwhile, the dollar is still where it was before. So 67.4 US cents, 93.3 Australian, because we're still waiting for Janet Yellen to tell us what's going to happen next.
When is that happening?
Well, Janet Yellen, who's the chair of the US Federal Reserve, is going to be making a speech later Friday in New York, and what she says really is going to determine the course of the U.S. interest rates, whether they go up, whether they stay the same. The market's really pricing in a hike. We'll see what happens. Meanwhile, that's what I have for you today.
Excellent. Nona Peltier. I don't know. You just didn't.
Did you miss me yesterday? I was at the art fair.
Yeah, I missed you.
I was at the art fair.
When you're not here. You make business fantastically interesting, Nona. Did you buy any art?
No, actually, I was more interested in art as an investment.
Right.
Yeah, and I decided that,
you have to buy something you love, Nona, don't you?
I could have interviewed you because that's what everyone said.
Yeah. Anyway, Nona Peltier, thanks so much, Nona. You're fantastic. See you on Monday. Are you on next week?
Could be me.
Okay. Right. The day after the budget, the debate is centred around whether or not the government will embark on a major program of tax cuts in an election year. Seems to be some tension here between the Prime Minister, who we're told wants it, and Bill English, who we're told wants it somewhat less. Anyway, the Finance Minister, Bill English, has opened the door a little wider to the prospect of cuts, saying the government's debt reduction target could be eased, but the Labor Party warns large tax cuts simply aren't affordable and they're not a priority. Here's our political reporter, May Heron.
Bill English was downplaying the possibility of tax cuts, saying reducing debt was his priority. But he now says reducing debt at a slower pace is an option.
That is one of the choices, because that would be implied by, for instance, putting more money into the super fund, reducing taxes or spending more than we forecast.
However, Bill English is rejecting claims the government has been storing up cash to lavish on tax cuts during its election campaign next year.
I don't think they should be quite so cynical. They should read the budget and look at the things that the government's wants to achieve, and we think we've got a reasonable balance of applying new spending and getting the government's books balanced. I mean, we couldn't have spent a whole lot more without getting into deficit in the next 12 months. We didn't want to do that, and I don't think anyone would expect us to.
The Labor Party says it still believes sizable tax cuts aren't affordable now or in future years. Its leader, Andrew Little, says the budget projections show real wages will actually fall in 2017 and 2018, and the government would be better to focus on pushing up people's incomes. He says income tax thresholds should be looked at periodically with a view to pushing them up.
There is a case to say, yeah, of course you should review those thresholds. But when, you've got a boast from the Prime Minister now, it's kind of $3 billion of tax cuts. Well, that's the stuff that I think a lot of people will find disturbing, given the social deficits that we've got and given the total lack of effort on things that are going to push incomes up rather than just trying to give people a bit of extra money in their pocket through tax changes.
The Treasury forecasts the average wage will be $63,000 by 2020, just $7,000 short of the highest tax bracket, making the argument for moving tax threshold more compelling. The Green Party co-leader James Shaw says now's not the time to be cutting government revenue, as there are some real challenges facing the country, such as homelessness and climate change. He says this whole thing feels a lot like an election bribe.
Absolutely, I think it's all about timing. What they're saying is that there could be a tax cut in an election year, or even more cynically, the following year. In other words, re-elect us and we'll give you a tax cut, which is just a straight-out voter bribe.
While Bill English is certainly keeping his options open for tax cuts next year, given they could cost up to $3 billion, he warns there will be plenty of other demands for that cash. From Parliament for Checkpoint, May Heron.
The Education Minister, Hekia Parata, has revealed more details of the government's budget announcement targeting $12 million a year to the children of long-term beneficiaries. Today, she said schools will not know which of their students are attracting the funding, and they don't need to. The funding replaces the usual annual increase to operations grants next year. Our education correspondent, John Gerritsen, has been looking at this.
Students at Mount Cook School in Wellington welcomed Hekia Parata with a haka today, where she announced funding for new classrooms. But afterwards, the challenge was directed at the government's new targeted funding scheme. The scheme will provide about $80 a year for each of the 150,000 school children whose families were on a benefit for the past 5 years or for the first 5 years of their lives. Hekia Parata says data matching with Ministry of Social Development information in September will determine how much each school will get next year. But she says schools won't know which children are attracting it.
This will be anonymised data. We won't be naming the kids because, of course, that would be stigmatising them. We're using this formula to arrive at the allocation, but then it will be up to schools how they use it and how they measure the impact on achievement.
Ms Parata says schools don't need to know the identities of the children in question or even how many of them there are.
Most schools know who their struggling families are. In fact, I doubt there's any school that doesn't. But this isn't being targeted to the individual. We're using that to arrive at the formula. Then how schools use it will be to their professional discretion.
Hekia Parata says the money will not follow children if they change schools, and she says more than 98% of schools will get funding from the scheme. The government's plan has had a mixed reception from teachers and principals, but the principal of Mount Cook School, Sandy McCullum, says it's fantastic that money is being focused on the children who need it most.
I will just be curious to know how that will be managed, but certainly there's a massive need. We have a massive need in our school, and I think that any money for those children, is fantastic.
Yeah, so your school, you think, will benefit from this?
Well, I would hope so. Looking at the demographic of some of our families, I mean, it is critical. Yeah.
Sandy McCullum is also pleased with the 2 new classrooms announced for her school today, saying they'll help with extensive role growth at the school. In Wellington for Checkpoint, John Gerritsen.
17 minutes to 6, Donald Trump, derided, dismissed, scoffed at and written off, now formally has the number of delegates required to be the Republican candidate in November's US presidential elections. It's an extraordinary achievement, whatever you think of Trump. And it may be that the contempt so many people have felt for him was part of his outsider appeal. As our Washington correspondent Simon Marks told me earlier, Trump needed 1,237 delegates. Today he reached 1,238.
And that means that he is essentially, to all intents and purposes, unstoppable now. He will be the party's standard bearer in this November's presidential election. And, that is, whatever you think of Donald Trump and whatever you think of the inflammatory rhetoric that he's used on the campaign trail during the course of this primary campaign, that is a simply astonishing political achievement for a man who has never sought elected office of any kind before Everyone, myself included, said the day that he got into the race, he doesn't stand a chance. He's a circus act. It's a carnival atmosphere around his campaign. And yet here we are, just a matter of months later. He has thrown Washington conventional wisdom on its head, and he will be the Republican Party's standard bearer, even though the Republican Party elites and grandees, even at this point, aren't very happy about that.
Yes, the circus descriptions, the carnival descriptions, the people saying he doesn't stand a chance. In hindsight, which of course is all-knowing and all-seeing, that furthered his campaign because it established his credentials as the outsider candidate. And that was his shot at it, wasn't it?
I think that's absolutely right. He is the candidate who has thrown the rule book out of the window and resisted attempts by people within his inner circle. And there are some who have said to him, OK, now you've got to start acting more presidential. You've got to act more like a conventional political candidate. And he personally and his campaign manager, Cory Lewandowski, have said, we're not going to do it. We are going to allow Donald Trump to be Donald Trump. And that's why, even in the press conference that he held a few hours ago, in which he formally recognized the fact that he was now going to be the Republican Party's candidate, that he passed that all-important 1,237 delegate number, even in that press conference, he was once again shooting from the hip, making up policy on the hoof, as he's done all the way through this primary contest. He believes, John, that it served him very well, and the results of that are the fact that he's going to be the candidate.
Absolutely. Meanwhile, the Democrats. So some weeks ago, we were looking at the Republicans just losing it, and the Democrats and the inevitability of Clinton becoming the presumptive nominee, with Sanders dragging her somewhat to the left. Now, of course, the Democrats are in disarray. There is bitter infighting going on there, and they are playing into Trump's hands, aren't they?
Totally. Who would have imagined that the Republicans, there were 17 of them running for the presidency when this race began, who would have imagined that the Republicans would have picked a nominee before Hillary Clinton had formally dealt with Bernie Sanders? But Hillary Clinton is having a dreadful week here. As you know, the State Department Inspector General published a report that was very, very critical of the way in which she'd handled this issue surrounding her decision to use a personal email server while she was Secretary of State. This is the week in which Donald Trump, for the first time in national polls where you match up Hillary Clinton versus Donald Trump, has surpassed Donald Trump in those opinion polls, and now we see her sliding in popularity in California. California, of all places, which is yet to hold its Democratic primary contest. Hillary Clinton has not so far been able to seal the deal. Everyone, of course, thinks that she eventually will, that she will eventually be the candidate, but she will become the candidate after this very, very bruising primary contest with Bernie Sanders. And just as Donald Trump is now going to have to work overtime to coalesce and unify the Republican Party around him, Hillary Clinton's got quite a job ahead of herself doing exactly the same thing on the Democratic side.
So is it time to become really rational about Trump and acknowledge that, in fact, as it stands at the moment, we have to regard him as a very real prospect of becoming president in November?
Without question. There is only one person standing between Donald Trump and the White House, and that's Hillary Clinton. And I have to tell you that in the last few days, and let me preface this by with a public health warning, because Washington conventional wisdom, as we know after this process, is largely meaningless. But over the last few days, you do get the sense that the conversation in this city, at least, is beginning to shift. I was at an event over the weekend, and I was talking to a former Assistant Secretary of State, a Republican who served in the George W. Bush administration, who told me that he now believes that Donald Trump will beat Hillary Clinton in November, an outcome that he described as apocalyptic. It's not an outcome that he wants to see, but he thinks that Hillary Clinton is now so damaged, has such an enormous trust problem with voters, and Donald Trump has this extraordinary way of, like a broken clock, always being right twice a day, saying whatever he wants at any given moment. The media here has really not held his feet to the fire. They haven't forced him to explain many of the policy positions that he's been throwing out there in an incendiary fashion on the campaign trail. And if he can carry that off all the way through until November, while the task ahead of him is difficult because he's got to reach those all-important swing voters, people who sometimes vote Democratic, sometimes vote Republican in battleground states like Florida, like Michigan, like Wisconsin, like Ohio. That's a very tough road for him to wander down, but equally, who would ever have thought that he would be in a position to lead the Republican Party down that avenue?
Quite incredible. Simon Marks from Washington. Home again, a veteran whangarei truck driver says low pay and long hours on the road are the real reasons log truck drivers keep rolling their rigs in Northland. There have been 7 log truck crashes in as many weeks in the north, and drivers have been attending safety seminars as the industry scrambles to sort the problem. Our reporter Lois Williams has been looking at this.
More than 180 truck drivers, road freight reps and forestry owners have taken part in rollover prevention clinics this week at Whangarei's Toll Stadium. The seminars are being run throughout the country by the industry's commercial body, the Road Transport Forum, and its regulator, the Transport Agency. The forum's chief executive, Ken Shirley, says the idea is to educate drivers and freight loaders on factors that can cause a truck to roll. Things like speed, centre of gravity, weight transfer and G-forces.
It's aimed at not just drivers but also dispatchers, loaders, all people associated with the industry, just to increase the awareness and understanding of what conditions can potentially lead to a rollover situation.
But a group which rallied in support of truck drivers this morning says the technical reasons for rollovers don't explain why suddenly they're happening so often. Gordon Leddy, who drove trucks for 30 years in the north, believes the underlying cause is a combination of inexperienced drivers and tiredness.
The lack of experience that they've got around the place at the moment is due to the fact that we have a lot of good truck drivers, but they're not driving anymore because of A, the conditions, B, the wages and the hours that they've got to work. Most truck drivers have to do 70 hours a week just to make ends meet, and that's because of the wages they're on.
Gordon Leddy says tired drivers make mistakes, and in Northland he says they're under pressure from companies pushing them to make as many trips a day as they can from forest to port.
People say, that truck drivers are always grumpy and tired and all that things like that. Well, that's the case. You're starting at 2 in the morning and working till 4 in the afternoon, and then you get home and then you've got to be asleep again by 7, 8 o'clock so you can start it the next day and do it all over again. And that's a 5-day process, sometimes 6.
Freight companies in Northland pay as little as $16.80 an hour to the drivers who haul logs up and down roads never built for that load. The average rate in the region is about $18. And Ken Shirley says that's a result of fierce competition between freight companies and constant undercutting to win contracts.
Freight rates have been driven down over decades, and part of that is everyone's been pushing all boundaries, hopefully not safety boundaries, but to try to make it work. And it's a general message out really to the whole country that we're going to have to pay more in freight rate to ensure that drivers don't have to work 70 hours a week, because I believe that's just too much.
Ken Shirley says forest owners also bear some responsibility for road safety and should award contracts to the best trucking firms, not the cheapest ones. Northland's union convener, Albie Barr, says the poor conditions faced by the region's log truck drivers also reflect the fact that most don't belong to a union.
The issue is really around managing fatigue and having good systems in place. So what we're trying to do is, we know there's truck drivers out there that want the coverage of being in a union, and unions work closely with the employer to put in safety measures, to have health and safety committees where the workers have a say.
There have been 30 rollover prevention seminars around the country so far, and the Road Transport Forum says they're in growing demand. For Checkpoint, Lois Williams.
The time on Checkpoint is coming up to 6 minutes to 6. The widow of a truck driver who survived a horrendous crash earlier this year but later died has spoken about her very happy life with the man she describes as a true gent. Michael Fairclough was driving a tanker which hit a car on the main thoroughfare of the South Taranaki town of Pātea in March. 3 Pātea locals were killed in the crash and 53-year-old Michael was found dead at his home 4 days after the accident. His death is not being treated as suspicious. His widow, Chrissy Fairclough, spoke to our Taranaki reporter, Robin Martin.
Life with Michael was happy, really happy. He has his thing, I had my thing. I loved shopping. He liked his motorbike. Yeah, so we had a common, different interests, but, we always came together as one. Yeah, it was just really, really nice. I can honestly tell you we never argued. We never raised our voices. He was that kind of guy.
He was a truck driver and he loved truck driving and
yeah, loved his work, yeah. And he slept, like he was getting up at 4:30 in the morning like we do. He was there, he was in bed by 8:30, so, he got enough sleep and everything.
And I hear that motorcycles were a huge passion of his. How was that?
Yeah, he loved his Harleys. Other bikes as well, but yeah, the last bike he owned, it was his baby. I caught him talking to it once, for telling it how gorgeous it was. But yeah, he loved, and he spent a lot of money on it, getting it the way he liked it. We didn't own it for our wedding, but we actually had our wedding photos taken on that particular bike as well.
And of course, earlier in the year, there's this horrible thing happens, this terrible accident, and Mike survives. So what was it like when he came home?
He was very sad, still in shock, I'd say, really. And then to be told that 3 people had died, he just couldn't handle it. He walked around in a dazed state there for a few days. But, at the same time, keeping himself busy, but, the things he was keeping us busy was probably what he was planning on doing, sort of thing.
Were you able to help him? Or?
All I could do was tell him how much I loved him and, I'd be there for him, but he'd already made up his mind that he wasn't the man I married and things were never going to be the same, sort of thing. Knowing that, it was just knowing that 3 people had lost their lives. I couldn't do anything, and I was helpless. I could hold him and tell him how much I loved him, and and he would tell me how strong I am, but not knowing that, he was preparing me for something I wasn't ready for.
I don't know, it's a very unique set of circumstances that Mike was involved in, but do you have any kind of message for people who might find themselves in a similar position?
Yeah, you've really got to go to the person you love and tell them exactly how you feel, but I'm sorry, it's usually the ones that don't say anything, but the ones that do it. So I would have never guessed, or else I would have begged him not to leave me. But yeah, it's the ones that don't say it you've got to worry about. So yeah, I didn't ask him not to leave me because I didn't think it would ever come into our lives because of how happy we were. So it's a hard one because just try and keep an eye on people and about, looking down, try and talk to them, hug them and tell them I want them.
Chrissy Fairclough, keep an eye on people. Lovely advice, Chrissy. Thank you. She was speaking to our Taranaki reporter, Robin Martin. Coming up after the news at 6, we're going to talk to John Key about Auckland land, housing and the budget. But we've shuffled the program around a bit and brought up an appalling piece of nonsense that we were going to end the program with tonight. For reasons that defy my comprehension, a man in India is so obsessed with setting Guinness World Records, he's changed his name to Guinness. He should really get a life. He's had 366 flags tattooed on his body and had all his teeth removed so he could put nearly 500 drinking straws and more than 50 burning candles in his mouth. Unbelievable. Roll tape.
He's got 366 flags of the world tattooed on his body and can hold 57 burning candles in his mouth. Meet Guinness Rishi, a 73-year-old Indian man so obsessed with getting himself into the Guinness Book of World Records, he's changed his name. But that's not the least of the modifications he's made for his hobby. He can also hold 496 straws in his mouth, and for that,
I need a space. I have to remove my every teeth so I can put the maximum straw in my mouth.
His home in Delhi is a shrine to the some 20-odd records he claims to have broken, most flags tattooed on his body, amongst others. He rode a scooter for 1,001 hours. He's also consumed an entire bottle of ketchup in less than 4 minutes, and once he delivered a pizza from New Delhi to San Francisco. His fervor for world records isn't appreciated by everyone, though. His 80-year-old wife has said she's definitely against having another baby.
It's not often I'm lost for words. Shut up, Katrina Bennett. It's not even funny.
Yes, it is. It's very funny.
We're getting lots and lots of feedback on housing still. This is such an important issue. We're going to return to it after the news, but a lovely email from a person who came here as a GP, as a young GP in 1980s, and was told that they had to go to the back blocks for a couple of years. They ended up in Te Awamutu. They have been there happily, and they recommend that people be encouraged to go somewhere other than Auckland for a couple of years before they move to Auckland, because they might actually find a life they love there, as this delightful email suggests they did. It's 6 o'clock on Checkpoint. Kia ora everyone, you are with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Wonderful to have your company. We promise no more stories in the next half hour about the Guinness Book of Records. Thank you for joining us. Coming up in the next 30 minutes, a spanner in the works of the State House sell-off. John Key talks about, well, how the Auckland City Council's got to provide some land, the second largest return of ancestral human remains to New Zealand, and the A to Z of how to wear a turban. Some delightful young men come and join us in the studio. Sikhs, they describe why they wear a turban and what it means to them. All of that and more coming up, but first the news with Katrina Batten.
Ngā mihi nui, good evening. Russell John Tully was sentenced to 27 years in prison today for the fatal Ashburton work and income office shootings. Tully was found guilty of the murders of Peggy Noble and Lee Cleveland and one count of attempted murder following a 2-week trial. Sally Murphy was at the sentencing in the High Court in Christchurch.
Tully displayed no emotion as the woman who survived the shooting read out their witness impact statements. Kim Adams said she feels lucky to be alive, but will never forget the day the man she tried to help tried to kill her. Tully shot at Miss Adams as she ran out of the office. She has post-traumatic stress disorder and is still unable to work full-time. Justice Manders sentenced Tully to a minimum non-parole period of 27 years. He said Tully has shown no remorse and has no regard for the sanctity of human life. In Christchurch, Sally Murphy.
The Green Party says the government is using tax cuts as an election bribe. The day after the Finance Minister Bill English delivered his 8th budget, he's opened the door a little wider to tax cuts, saying the government's debt reduction target could be eased. The Green Party co-leader James Shaw says now's not the time to be cutting revenues, with some real challenges facing the country, such as homelessness and climate change. He says it's cynical to promise tax cuts in an election next year or the following year. The Auckland Council has described as simplistic a government plan to control the supply of housing land by measuring land prices. The Prime Minister John Key says the government's national policy statement would override Auckland's development blueprint, the unitary plan. The Deputy Mayor, Penny Hulse, says land supply is not the big issue holding back home building.
We've got 6.5 years of land planned for, infrastructure in the ground and ready to go. Government themselves have got more than 20 special housing areas that belong to Housing New Zealand that are ready to go. There's no shortage of places to build. Our question to government would be, perhaps you need to just get on with it.
Auckland's Deputy Mayor Penny Hulse. Met Service is warning of torrential rain and tropical cyclone strength winds for most of the country tonight and into the weekend as a severe storm strengthens across the Tasman Sea. It says the storm will bring heavy rain, thunderstorms and damaging wind gusts. In the North Island, rain will be heaviest in Taranaki, Manawatu, Whanganui and Wellington, with more than 100 millimetres overnight in places, possibly causing flooding and slips. Met Service says wind gusts may be higher than 130 kilometres per hour in some areas, with the worst of the wind in the Marlborough and Wellington regions. Korean Airlines has evacuated 319 passengers and crew from an aircraft preparing to take off from Japan's Haneda Airport in Tokyo after smoke came from the engine. The incident prompted authorities to temporarily close down Japan's busiest aviation hub. The Boeing 777 is on a runway being sprayed with foam by fire trucks, with 4 of its emergency slides deployed. Leaders of the G7 group of industrialised nations say world economic growth is an urgent priority requiring a global response. In a statement at the close of the G7's annual meeting held this year in Japan, the group pledged to keep international markets open and to fight all forms of protectionism. But the BBC's Karishma Vaswani says they've failed to agree on any practical steps.
This was very much a summit to try and address the issues in the global economy, and host Japan, the Japanese Prime Minister, was trying to get his counterparts to agree that fiscal stimulus is the way to go. Spend more money and help boost the economy. They didn't quite get there. What they've actually said is a rather long and complicated sentence, which in effect means we'll all adopt a sort of flexible approach to fixing the problems in the global economy and for our own individual countries.
Karishma Vaswani in Japan. After being removed from New Zealand in the 19th century, the remains of 60 Māori and Moriori were welcomed home this afternoon in a moving ceremony at Te Papa in Wellington. It's the second largest return of ancestral human remains since the government repatriation program began in 1990. They included 4 toimoko or mummified tattoo Māori heads from American and British museums. The kai whakahaere of Te Runanga o Ngaitahu, Mark Solomon, says it brings up conflicting feelings.
It's sad, 60 human remains being brought back. So there's a lot of sadness in that, but there's also a lot of aroha because they're home and we have an opportunity now to reinter them in their own whenua.
Sir Mark Solomon, many of the remains were collected during expeditions to New Zealand in the 19th century. In sport, New Zealand cricket will know in the next 48 hours whether a day-night test will go ahead against India in India later this year. The Indian Cricket Board blindsided its New Zealand counterpart in April when it announced it wanted to play a day-night test against the Black Caps when they tour there. The Chief Executive of New Zealand Cricket, David White, says he'll get the schedule for the series over the next couple of days.
And that could include the possibility of a day-night test match. We're still to see that. So I think it's very much on the agenda, and I think it's very much on the agenda for all the full members, and I think it can be something that we see a lot more of in the future.
New Zealand Cricket has also announced it hopes to host the first day-night test in New Zealand at Eden Park in Auckland when England play here in early 2018. The Highlanders coach Jamie Joseph is reluctant to give too much away ahead of last year's Super Rugby final repeat against the Hurricanes in Wellington tonight. The defending champions, the Highlanders, currently sit third in the New Zealand Conference and the Hurricanes fourth. Joseph says he's focused on what his game plan is rather than worrying about what the Hurricanes try. The defending NBA basketball champions, the Golden State Warriors, have won Game 5 of the Western Conference playoffs, beating the Oklahoma City Thunder 120 to 111 in Oakland. Oklahoma now lead the best-of-7 series 3-2. Game 6 is on Sunday. That's the news.
Tomorrow morning, Rich Cohen explains why the Rolling Stones are, and always will be, the greatest rock and roll band in the world. Professor Richie Poulton on what's been learned from following the lives of 1,000 babies born in Dunedin in 1972. And artist Frances Hugh Pritchard on her crafty and uncanny work. Join me, Kim Hill, tomorrow morning from 8 on RNZ National.
Met Service weather to midnight tomorrow, Northland to Waikato, Coromandel and Bay of Plenty. A few showers turning to rain for a time tomorrow morning with heavy and possibly thundery falls. Gisborne, Hawke's Bay, Wairarapa, high cloud increasing. Rain tomorrow morning, then clearing, however showers for Wairarapa tomorrow evening. Waitomo to Wellington, including Taumaranui, Taupo, Taihape, also Nelson and Marlborough. Scattered showers, rain with heavy and possibly thundery falls, spreading east overnight. Rain easing to showers tomorrow morning, some thundery in the west from tomorrow afternoon. Bulla in Westland, rain developing this evening with heavy and possibly thundery falls north of the glaciers, rain easing tomorrow afternoon. Fiordland, mostly fine. Canterbury, Otago, North Otago and Dunedin, rain with heavy falls spreading south overnight and snow lowering to 600 metres, easing tomorrow evening. For the remainder of Otago and Southland, isolated showers, turning to rain tomorrow morning with snow down to 600 metres. And the Chatham Islands, fine apart from rain tomorrow morning. It's coming up to 6:09.
Thank you very much indeed, Katrina. Are you going to watch the Highlanders Hurricanes?
Yes, I am.
Who's going to win?
The Hurricanes, of course. I mean, I'm not quite sure. I put in a tip that they will beat, but I'm not quite sure if that's actually going to happen.
Yeah.
I have my fingers crossed.
Yeah.
And my toes.
Cutting off your fingers and toes are right. What a cracker of a game it's going to be. Have a lovely weekend.
You too.
Thanks, Katrina. With housing very much in the news over the past fortnight and revelations on Checkpoint that a shortage of state houses in Auckland has seen people in very basic emergency accommodation paying up to $1,600 a week, money they borrow from WINZ but have to repay, the government remains committed to selling off state houses. Today, the sale of 348 Housing New Zealand homes in Invercargill was put on hold after the only group to submit a proposal pulled out. The state homes are part of the government's plans to transfer, that's their word, up to 2,000 properties across the country this year to registered community housing providers. Here's our political reporter, Demelza Leslie.
The Housing New Zealand Minister, Bill English, says the group pact withdrew from buying the more than 300 houses in Invercargill as it didn't fit with its plans to provide for the community. He says the process has been put on hold until other options can be assessed. Mr English says the procurement process for more than 1,100 properties in Tauranga is still underway. But Labour's housing spokesperson Phil Twyford says it's the second group to pull out of buying state houses. He says the plans are a shambles and the government should pull the pin on them.
It's been implemented incompetently and it's time to go back to the drawing board. And what the government should do here is cancel the planned sell-off of state houses and back away from the whole policy.
The Green Party's social housing spokesperson, Marama Davidson, says tenants of the Invercargill houses have told her that the properties are in poor condition. She says some of them are being treated for asbestos and leaky windows.
The government hasn't fixed them up, hasn't been a good landlord. They're in shoddy condition and the potential buyers have pulled out. This is a complete failure.
Ms Davidson says the risk now is that the government will want to sell the houses off at bargain basement prices.
They're not worth what we should be able to get money for them. That's a real worry. We would totally be losing out if that was the case.
The Prime Minister, John Campbell, says the loss of the sale in Invercargill does not mean the social housing plan is faulty.
That's one particular provider, and in the end, will another one come through? I suspect so. If they don't, does it matter? Not really. Ultimately, if we don't get the capital from there, well, we can put another capital from somewhere else. Our preference would be to recycle that capital somewhere else.
And Mr Campbell says those houses won't be sold at rock-bottom prices.
We're not going to sell houses unless they move to a social housing provider to provide the same kinds of services that were provided there in the past.
Mr Campbell says another group has indicated they might be interested in buying and managing the houses in Invercargill. The government is also considering a proposal by Horowhenua District Council to transfer 115 council flats and 250 Housing New Zealand properties in Foxton, Levin and Shannon to a community provider. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Demelza Leslie.
Thanks, Demelza. So many people have emailed us this in over the past couple of weeks. Every time I hear there is no housing crisis in New Zealand, you know what I'm going to say, blam, blam, blam. There is no depression in New Zealand. I don't know how many people have emailed that in, but many, many, many people. And Robin did so tonight. So thank you, Robin. The Blams. Boy, that is a song people remember. If you build it, they will come, was the line from Field of Dreams in Auckland. They haven't built it. Well, not in the numbers required, but people have come anyway. And as the cost of housing rises and rises, the debate about an appropriate response increasingly involves the government blaming the Auckland Council for a lack of land to build on. Of course, finding the land is one thing. Building an infrastructure to support it is another. Who pays? And that was very much under discussion when the Prime Minister held a media stand-up in downtown Auckland this afternoon. In short, he said it's up to the council to create land supply.
And ultimately, that comes down to when they're setting a unitary plan that it delivers the number of houses that are required in that area. Auckland's about 500,000, the size of the Auckland population is 500,000 larger than it was, I think 10 or 20 years ago. It's almost certainly going to grow considerably in the future, and it needs to be able to accommodate that. That will be a combination of brownfield development and a combination of new subdivisions, but ultimately the land supply has to keep up. But what we just need to appreciate is that Auckland is an attractive city to live in. It's got growth. The real pressure in terms of the housing market in New Zealand's in Auckland, and we need to address that through land supply.
So if you get the land supply, if you get the sections, if the council does everything you hope they do, and the unitary plan is a phenomenal success story, then what?
Well, we won't be talking about it quite so much because it'll, ultimately you'll have a market which works in a better way than it currently does.
So it's the market, is it? What will the government do? I mean, who builds the houses?
Not the government. I mean, what the government does do is train people and provide those courses and support. So the concept of a massive government building program, I think, is flawed because we haven't done that for a very long time. The Ministry of Works used to do those kinds of things. That was the model back in the 50s. But we don't build schools anymore, we don't build roads anymore, and we don't build houses. And in fact, if you look in the social housing area, and I know you guys want to talk about that, but if you look in the social housing area, one of the things that we've been trying to do is to say, how do we get both better supply of where we want it and more providers in the market. So the idea around giving income-related rents to social housing providers is to allow people to actually develop their own portfolio as a social housing provider in a place like Auckland. So if you look at our, for instance, Housing New Zealand home composition, while it's true the overall numbers of Housing New Zealand homes haven't risen dramatically, the mix is changing, and there are more in Auckland and less in places that we don't need them.
So just on the Auckland Council, the Auckland Council says it needs $17 billion to provide the infrastructure for all these extra housing areas and to build out. Is the government going to help the council get that $17 billion? Because they say they're up against their debt limits.
Okay, but in the first instance, the council needs to go and look at its own balance sheet and its own requirements.
But the ratepayers are saying we don't want to take on the debt.
But debt is not the only way you can fund these issues.
Sell assets?
Well, they might do. It's a matter for them, isn't it?
But isn't the risk here that you say to the council, raise your money, sell your assets, they say to you, no, in the end we don't get any houses built?
Well, you're going to get houses built, because the national policy statement will drive the release of land, and those houses will be built. Mark my words.
Will they be houses people can afford? I mean, isn't the issue at the bottom? I mean, Prime Minister, you use the word aspiration a lot, and you believe in aspiration. Where is the aspiration in this policy?
Okay, so if you look at the special, number of parts, but if you look at the special housing areas, I mean, quite a number of them have an affordable component, and so that's not new. So that's the first thing. But the second thing is, if you are talking to a young, let's say a young couple that want to buy their first home, there are two or three things that they need. One is a job to support that most often. Second thing they need is affordable interest rates. But the third thing they need is an affordable home. And the driving factor of whether a home is affordable or not is less about the building costs and much more about the land costs. So if the government can address that issue, so land prices don't rise as rapidly, it does actually allow them to be more affordable. And we've seen 12,000 youngsters go in there through and buy a first home through KiwiSaver Home Start. So, if you want to get people in a house, then what you have to do is, outside of those conditions, is make it more affordable over time, and that has to be around land. I mean, there are things you can do around building, but fundamentally it's the land that's outstripping the cost increase, not fundamentally the building.
There's the Prime Minister talking at a media stand-up in Auckland earlier this afternoon. 6:17 on RNZ National. Coming up on World Watch PM at 6:30 with Alex Perrottet. The UN warns Syrian children will die from malnourishment if they don't get aid soon. And Donald Trump is happy that foreign leaders are rattled about his winning the Republican race. All of that coming up in 12 and a half minutes. The remains of 60 Māori and Moriori were welcomed home from the United States this afternoon in a moving ceremony at Te Papa in Wellington. It's the second largest return of ancestral human remains since the government repatriation program began in 1990. Te Manu Korihi reporter Laura Bootham was at the event.
A moving karanga ushered the manuhiri, bringing the remains of tupuna into Te Papa. Then, a hakapōwhiri welcomed the remains belonging to 54 individuals kept by the Smithsonian Institution. They included 4 toi moko, or mummified tattooed Māori heads, while a further 6 remains were from US and British museums. Many were collected during expeditions to New Zealand in the 19th century. Washington DC's Smithsonian Institution is returning the majority, some of which are thought to be from Taranaki and Whanganui, as well as Moriori from the Chatham Islands. Winner Tate is a member of the repatriation team that went to the US. The delegation went to a number of museums, and Winner Tate says when she was confronted with the ancestors, she felt their wairua or spirit.
In the repatriation of these taonga, of these tipuna, I'm really humbled, and for me, my first impressions and experience, and it was just really overwhelming, and this real deep-seated spiritual thing was happening for me, and I was really, really emotionally charged and connected to them when I saw them.
She says the experience has changed her forever.
Coming home with them today, I kind of, it was hard for me to let them go and let the people come, and it was really hard. It's kind of really emotionally attached to them, but that's what happens. That's what happens, and yeah, I think for me, it'll be an experience that we'll never ever forget.
The kai whakahaere of Te Runanga o Ngai Tahu, Mark Solomon, says it brings up conflicting feelings.
There are a whole gamut of emotions. It's sad, 60 human remains being brought back. So there's a lot of sadness in that, but there's also a lot of aroha because they're home, and we have an opportunity now to reinter them in their own whenua.
Since 1990, Karanga Aotearoa, a government-funded program, has negotiated the return of more than 400 human remains. Mr Solomon paid homage to Te Papa's efforts in returning the Indigenous people's ancestors.
Te Papa's done an amazing job. I was on the board here when they first started looking at repatriation, and it wasn't a simple process. In fact, at that time, most museums we approached, it was just a flat-out no. But Te Papa's kept at it and at it and at it. And as they talk today about relationships, and I personally believe Te Papa's leading the world in this, in bringing home ancestors.
Hami Piripi, a member of the Repatriation Committee, says while conservatively it's known there are at least 600 ancestral remains still to be returned, that's not the end of it.
There are many that would have been taken and found their way into marketplaces across Europe, sitting in people's attics. You don't sort of see them, because it's not really PC to display human remains these days. And so I imagine in time more will appear out of people's sort of attics. Some of the more wealthy families of Europe, perhaps, who have sort of historically collected these sorts of things. I suspect more will come there that we don't know about yet.
Over the next 12 months, Te Papa will be working with particular iwi to ensure they are returned to their homes. For Checkpoint, ko Laura Bootham Dene.
Lovely piece, Laura. Thank you very much. Coming up to 6:22 this weekend in Auckland, people who've never done so can wear a turban, and it will be put on for them by people for whom the turban is a statement of faith and identity, members of Auckland's Sikh community. In part, this is being done to overcome ignorance about what the turban is and what Sikhs are, and one of the men behind it knows the cost of that ignorance firsthand. Jaspreet Singh is the young medical student who was in an Auckland cafe late last year with his headphone wires sticking out of his university bag when a woman decided he was a terrorist and called the police. He and 2 friends from Auckland's Sikh community came into the studio this afternoon. Jaspreet, welcome. It's lovely to have you here.
Thank you.
So you've also got Panit and Harvin behind us, for people who are listening on the radio. So the 3 young men are in the studio. And we've also seconded Drew, who is our office administrator. And he is going to be a male model today, right? Yes. As you put it. Okay. So Jaspreet, what's going on here?
So we're here to promote our event that we're organising tomorrow, Auckland Turban Day. So this is something that's been done all around the world. So this is the first time in New Zealand, and it's a great opportunity for people to come and learn about turbans and the cultural values that are associated with them in a fun and interactive way.
So Pandit Dhanhavan, are you going to put a turban on Drew behind us now?
Yes,
right.
we are.
Can you start that? Do you mind doing that?
Yeah, sure, definitely.
And Jaspreet is going to describe what's going on. First of all, why do you wear a turban?
I think so. Turban more so it goes back quite a long time, even before Sikhism, but it's more so derived from the societal and cultural values of those Eastern countries. That's why you see turbans in Sikhism, in Hinduism, and in Islam as well. But the idea of a turban within Sikhism was that at that time in the society, you had to have a certain status to be able to wear a turban. It's either for rich people, or if you have sort of a social title, you could wear a turban. What in our mother tongue, Punjabi, turban, a person who wears a turban literally means a leader. The word is called Sardar, which literally means a leader. And that's one of the big things with a turban, is that it makes you stick out, and it's forcing you to be a leader. You have to.
Right. So you have to. You have to behave in an example that reflects appropriately on your beliefs.
Not just our beliefs, but us as humans, and sort of standing up for injustice that's happening anywhere, and helping out anyone that's in need.
Now, I didn't realise that you would be so relaxed about the idea of people wearing turbans, because I would have thought it would be slightly disrespectful if you were to seek to put a turban on.
Yep.
But actually, this weekend in Auckland, when is it, tomorrow?
Tomorrow, yep.
If you want to know what Drew is going through right now, which is having a turban put on, you can go along where? Where will this happen?
So this is at Aotearoa Square, just down the road from here. So we'll be starting from 12 p.m. To 3 p.m. We've got some masala chai as well for the people that are going to be there, and we'll have a Bhangra performance from a young group as well, starting at 12 p.m. So I'll encourage everyone to sort of come and join us. And I think for a long time, sort of people have been holding on to their cultural beliefs and not sharing it with the wider community. And I think for us who have migrated here and want to be part of this community, it's very important that we do share our values with the rest of the wider community.
It's also important people understand your values. I mean, you are the student who had the experience of someone describing you as a terrorist, right?
Yeah.
Which is just wrong on every level, and spoke to a profound ignorance, didn't it?
Well, I think it sort of happened after the Paris attacks, and that sort of event can precipitate these kind of beliefs that people have. But I think what I sort of tended to try to focus on was sort of the positives that we could get out of that event, and that was more so that I think it was a good opportunity for people to sort of reflect on their personal sort of associations that they might have with these kind of things. And hopefully I think we sort of managed to do a bit of that, and hopefully we can continue doing that in the future, because that's more so like a lifelong process rather than something that you can do overnight.
I don't, forgive me, because this is a totally inappropriate response, but I just want to say I think Drew looks very handsome.
Yes,
he does.
Sure does.
The phrase "silk purse sows ear" springs to mind. Sorry, Drew. I think that really suits you. What's the material? So what is the material? Is it a particular and special material, or?
I think it's cotton.
So it doesn't. So it doesn't have to. It doesn't have to.
No. I think it's just a cloth, but it becomes something else once it's being used, and that's the thing that we value. And another thing I think I sort of would like to mention is the principle of equality and the value of the importance of that to Sikhism. So as I mentioned, that back in the day, so you had to have a certain social status to be able to wear a turban, but in Sikhism, it doesn't matter what caste you are, it doesn't matter what gender you are, so females and males, everyone is allowed or encouraged to wear a turban. And these kind of things are there as, in today's society, these kind of things are there for us as reminders, to remind us of these principles in everyday life, so we can try our best to follow these.
Jaspreet Singh, and beautifully assisted. They were in the studio this afternoon, and if you want to have the experience or just simply see it happening, it's at Aotearoa Square, which is Upper Queen Street, from midday tomorrow. Well Watch coming up in 2 minutes, but a report just in from Deborah Lutterbeck and Reuters. 800 people have been able to flee Fallujah since Iraqi forces launched a major offensive to retake the city from ISIS. Those who've managed to leave reported dire living conditions inside the city, where an estimated 50,000 civilians remain, most of them just trapped.
The battle for control surrounding Fallujah. Iraqi security forces are able to claim victory in Garma in a fierce fight as they close in on Fallujah, an Islamic State stronghold. Civilians in Fallujah are already fleeing the fighting. Now these families are making do in territory under control of Iraqi security forces. This man is asked how security forces are treating him.
Very good.
He is asked about his hopes.
We hope for security to be spread and the government forces to advance more and more.
About 40 families managed to flee in the past 36 hours. One man said he had been hiding in a drainage pipe. There are still about 50,000 people trapped in Fallujah, a city without drinking water, electricity, and fuel, and a war closing in.
That report from Reuters bringing the program to an end for this week. Couple of pieces of feedback before we go on. John, keep talking about land cost. Lots of people are pointing out actually the cost of building in New Zealand is very, very high. Someone just had a 170 square metre home built in Christchurch that cost over 900 grand. That's not cheap building and does not include land cost. In Oz would be less than half the build cost. Actually, we are going to look at this because we do think you raise a really good point there. And how many rooms does John Key have in his massive homes? Wouldn't it be inspirational if he could accommodate a few homeless people? Says Ange. Thank you all for your feedback. Have a wonderful weekend. We'll be back at 5 o'clock on Monday on behalf of the excellent Checkpoint team. See you then, we hope.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. A woman who survived the Ashburton Work and Income Office shooting says the murderer, Russell Tully, is evil and should never be let back into society. Tully was today sentenced to a minimum 27 years in jail. The Green Party says the government is using the prospect of tax cuts as an election bribe. Korean Airlines has evacuated 319 passengers and crew from an aircraft preparing to take off from a Tokyo airport after smoke came from the engine. The remains of 60 Māori and Moriori were welcomed home this afternoon in a moving ceremony at the Papa in Wellington. Our next news and weather is at 7.
Welcome to World Watch PM. I'm Alex Perrottet. Tonight, Donald Trump officially